Um, so anyways, week one, CIT225. What I like to do week one is really just kind of just walk around kind of MySQL, um, talk about the, what's the difference between MySQL and MySQL Workbench, how do we use them, what do we use them for, just a really basic introduction to databases. So I like to teach the classes if you've never heard of databases before, because honestly I think it's the best place to start, because I know some of you have taken CIT 111, which is great. Hopefully things just come quicker, and I know many of you also haven't. So I think that it's just a good kind of starting point, just to kind of start as if no one's ever heard of it before, because it just builds from the ground up in case something's been missed. So kind of how I like to start is kind of talk about the difference between MySQL and MySQL Workbench. So the main objective behind week one in this course is really just to kind of get your stuff set up and be familiar with it. So in the process, and I know many of you have already started this or may have already had an install, but as part of this, we install MySQL, which is the actual server utility. And MySQL, the utility, is really just usually runs on a server, and we kind of cheat and we run it locally on our computers, which is perfectly fine. And in fact, it works great for when we're doing things like this. Like, and even me, when I'm doing development, I often run a MySQL server on my local computer, which is fine. But just for the context of how this normally works, like when you go out to get a job, if you're dealing with databases, which were you're probably in a computer science or CIT major, or web development, odds are you're going to be dealing with a database at some point. And in that, basically what we usually do is our database server does just only that. It does database stuff. And it's not a computer that we log into, that we have a mouse and a screen and stuff. It's usually just a server. So I actually have my database server sitting. Well, I have a few, but I have one that just sits here at my house, to run some of my blogs and stuff. In that IP address, so if I look at my IP address, I can see that my IP address is 10.0.0.82. But my database server is at 10.0.0.8. So I can connect to that server remotely and log into MySQL there. In fact, let's just try that. So just so you know, I'm in command line right now, and depending on your operating system, it may be varied. And just so you know, I'm showing you this. I'm showing you I guess the super hard technical way, so that way, if you want to, you can do it. And more so, it makes me feel better because, honestly, this is I actually, you might think like, oh, no one's going to do this when we have tools. I actually do this nearly every day. So I think it's important, but I'm also going to show you, if you're uncomfortable with this, I'm also going to show you how you can just do it with a few clicks. So, but I think it helps to kind of see the underneath workings. So I'm just going to view the help page. So MySQL dash help. Let's just see what we got here. Maybe they don't have a help page. I'm pretty sure they do. All right, so if we take a look at this stuff, basically I'm looking because there's a way here where we can choose the host, where basically we choose what we want to connect to. I think it's just dash H. Let's just try it. Quit MySQL. Apparently I can't remember my stuff, but well, let's see, it connected to the wrong one. Let's try. I don't know where I got the 2 from. Anyways, I can't remember my password right now. Try one more. There we go. Okay, third time's the charm. So I'm actually connected to a whole different computer than what I'm on right now, which is actually at 10.0.0.8. Now, normally this can change. So like I could connect to one at, you know, database.tannercrook.com or something like that, depending on however you set up your network. But once we're in, you'll notice that this kind of has this little MySQL prompt. And that's just what it is. It's a MySQL prompt. So right now we are connected to, we're using a command line program. And this command line program is basically going to allow us to send things to the database for it to kind of work on. So for example, if I wanted to show what databases I have, show databases. Sorry. There we go. So you can see I kind of have like a bunch of kind of stuff here. The main one we're going to be using in this class is called Sequila. So I can say use Sequila, and this will let me kind of, now I'm kind of in this database. So whenever we connect to a database, the first thing we do is we can show the databases, get kind of a list, and then we can say which one we want to use. And then from there, we can, show tables and see what kind of tables are in there, which we'll talk a lot about in the future. But anyways, now that we've kind of seen the hard way, now I'm going to show you the second hardest way. So right over here, I have my a similar connection. Now this one's running locally on my computer. If I right click on here, well, let's actually walk through how we connect this. So I'm going to click this little plus button here on my MySQL Workbench. So now we're in MySQL Workbench, and I'm just going to give this a name. So I'm going to say it's CIT225 duplicate. Well, let's just give it a name. Let's call it Spring2022. And here we can kind of choose our stuff. So by default, it's going to have 127.0.0.1, which is same thing as localhost, which means our local computer. So I'm actually going to leave that just like that, leave pretty much everything standard, and I'm going to do test connection. Now you'll notice that it says, oh, it failed, right? Access denied for root. So the one thing we need to make sure we do is we have the correct username. Now, root is probably the correct username depending on how you set up your server. So when you do the install, it usually prompts you for a default password for root. That's what you'll use there. Now I've kind of changed mine. So I'm going to just type in my password here, do test connection. It's going to prompt me for my password. My password is school rocks. And you'll see that it's successfully made the connection. And so at this point, I'm all set. And you can see that now this little connection's over here. Now at this point, I can do one of two things. The first thing is I can right click and say, start command line client. Now this is the easiest way to kind of jump into the command line. You'll find that there's other ways to do it too, depending on which documentation you read, but that is by far the easiest. There we go. And you can see it gets us to the exact same places when I did it. If you're on Windows, it might look just a little bit different. But if you want to play around with command line, which we're going to do in week 1, that's okay. And just so you know, like if you're already kind of scared, don't be, because in week 1, we're just kind of exploring. And realistically, if you never want to touch command line again the rest of this course, you don't have to, which is really nice, because I do think that there's benefits to both, which we're going to talk a lot about because the paper is all about that if you haven't seen it already. So that's the second hardest way. Now, the way that most of you are probably going to opt to do this is actually through the graphical user interface, or the GUI. So if I say GUI, just know that I'm talking about buttons and windows and that kind of stuff. And to get into that, basically, we just have to double click on our connection here, and it's just going to pop right up. And now you can see that we have like our text editor that looks pretty normal. But then over here on the side, we have all of our schemas, or our databases. So whenever you hear the word schema, and just know that it's talking about the same thing as a database in most cases. Now there are some specific differences. in some database systems, but in MySQL, they're all the same. So, and in here, we should have a Sequila database, and under there, we can kind of flip through and see all of our tables, and we can open up those and see the columns inside that table. So now, as a quick little introduction to what a database is, and this is just in case you were like me, when I first heard of a database, like I knew like, oh, it stores data, but I didn't understand how, or anything underneath it, which I'm sure there's some of you that are in the same boat, which is absolutely okay. So basically, how I like to think of a database is I like to think of each table like an Excel spreadsheet. But and so like if we were to look at like, let's say the customer table, right? So let's pull, just so you know, when I'm talking, I often forget words to type. So, oh, and we got to use Sequila. We got to make sure we're using the right one here. And boom, there we go. So just like a spreadsheet, we can see that we have rows and we have columns. Now, one of the kind of fundamental things about databases is that we don't want to duplicate any data, right? We don't want to have to worry about changing things a lot. So for example, a customer's email in Excel, we might often, you know, put email on every sheet, or we, you know, if we're really advanced, we do something like a VLOOKUP, which in databases is pretty pivotal. We have what's called joins. But basically, we try to keep all of our data isolated. So, for example, a customer's email should really only exist once in the whole database. And that's right here in our customer table. So, when we're thinking about databases, we want to think about how do I separate this data? A big part of this class is not only learning about SQL, the language that we use to interact with the database, but also I think it's a great introduction to data design and data modeling, which is really important, and I think just great critical thinking skills. So as we're looking at this customer data, basically we only want stuff that applies to a customer in this table. So really we think objectively, okay, like, so what am I putting in this table? What objects? And every one of those objects is a record in the table or a row. So anyways, and every one of these databases, every one of these tables in the database, kind of what makes a relational database, as you'll find out in the reading, is that tables can be related to one another. So if we're looking at this data, you'll notice that there might be some things missing from this customer table, like an address or a store, various things like that. You can kind of see that it's missing. And let's actually go to kind of a better use case here. So I'm going to actually select everything from actor. So now, just so you know, this is kind of just an introduction. We're kind of just talking about kind of the end game goal for a database. So don't worry if you don't follow along here. You don't need to necessarily be taking notes about how we actually go about doing this, because this is what we're going to be learning throughout the course. But I kind of just want to give like kind of like a point B, so to speak, so we know where we're aiming. So inside this actor table, we have actors, right? And then we also might have another table called film. Select everything from film. Now, in a normal spreadsheet, you know, we might have something where we, in fact, let me just pull one up here real quick. In a spreadsheet, we might have something along the lines where we kind of do something like this, where we say, hey, you know, I want to track, you know, what's the film, and then I want a list of actors. So let's say actor 1, actor 2, actor 3, you know, and you can see how that gets kind of messy. You know, if we want all this kind of on one sheet, you know, typically with spreadsheets, we tend to kind of expand out. But you know, what if we have 6 actors in a film? Or, you know, we basically kind of have to have a record for all that. So, you know, like if we were going to do Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, and pardon, I'm not capitalizing and stuff like that. And I honestly don't even know the actors' names. I know the characters, but not the actors. You know, we would go along and kind of fill this out. So like more son or whatever his name is, so on and so forth. But anyways, so we kind of build those out when we're used to spreadsheets. But in databases, instead of building out, what we do is we connect things. So essentially what we would do instead is, instead of kind of building it out like that, what we would do is we would have a film and an actor ID. So, and sometimes even connected, but for the most part, we kind of have like a film and an actor. So if we were doing Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, you know, we might have a line here for Viggo Mortensen, and then another for whoever plays Gimli, or, you know, something like that. I guess Orlando Bloom. Let's use Orlando Bloom. I do know him. You know, so we kind of build them down like that. So basically, this gets a little confusing. So we have actor, we have film, but then we have this little table called film actor. And if we take a look at this film actor table, it doesn't look like there's anything meaningful in here, right? Like we literally have 3 columns, 2 are numbers and 1's a date. And really what this is saying, what this table is doing, is it's telling us which actors were in which films. Because if we're thinking about it, an actor can be in multiple films, and films can have multiple actors. So rather than just say like, oh, which actors in a film, we basically build this intermediary table that allows us to have a many-to-many relationship. And that many-to-many relationship is what's going to allow us to be able to say like, oh, Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings has Viggo Mortensen and Orlando Bloom, but Orlando Bloom is also in every one of the Pirates of the Caribbean films. So you can kind of see like how basically we need this. And real quick, just while we're here, just to kind of show you, I'm going to reverse engineer next. We're going to kind of take a look at this data kind of more visually. So if we're looking at our film stuff, so here's our film table. And let's take a look at actor and film actor. So, you know, there's lots of other tables here, and we're kind of going to just move some of those out of the way here. Some of this stuff out of here. I can actually hide this. Just delete it normally, but okay. So if we're taking a look at how our tables align here, this is called an ERD. Basically, we can see our table here's our tables that we have here and how they're related. So these are really handy because we can see all the columns in each one of these tables. And then specifically, what makes this a relational database system is how they're related to each other. And we can look at this. And so film actor, so how do we know that an actor is in a film? Well, it's not in the film table, but inside of film, we have the film ID, which is kind of like the unique identifier for every film, and which we call primary key. And that primary key is inside of this film actor table. And inside this film actor table, this is called a foreign key because it's a key that's foreign to the table. And that table also contains the actor ID. So we can see here, these little crow's feet is what they're called, that have the 3 lines. That is a one-to-many relationship, and this is a one-to-many relationship, meaning that a film can have multiple actors and an actor can be in multiple films. So basically, this is kind of like a common design that we can kind of do to build those kinds of business logic designs where, you know, hey, a film can have multiple actors and an actor can be in multiple films. So anyways, that's kind of this is an ERD, which we're going to cover more in next week. So like I said, I kind of just want to kind of overview some of this to kind of get kicked off here. So So that's kind of the goal. So databases are really databases are programs that run usually on a server that allow us to store, retrieve, and manipulate data. And we usually connect to it through a separate computer. So most of the time we're kind of sitting on across the internet from these things. But in this class, it's actually running on your computer. So you'll kind of, if you haven't already, when you install it, you'll actually install the MySQL, which is the actual server part of it. And then you'll install MySQL Workbench, which is the actual kind of like GUI that we use to interact with the server. So technically you're installing both. Most of the time, like if you're in the working world, the database is already set up. You just install MySQL Workbench and then connect to the database. Once you're in there, you should have this Sequila database, and part of the instructions it'll walk you through. There's a point when you're installing, I think it may prompt you if you want to include the Sequila demo data. You just leave that checked. I think it's by default. If for some reason you get it and you don't have the Sequila database, just let me know. I have instructions. Super easy to get installed, so no worries. All right. Cool. So that's kind of a broad overview. So now what I kind of want to do is kind of focus more in on what we're going to be doing in week 1. So to do that, let's just kind of pop in and take a look at the module for the week. So inside of the week 1 module, you're going to have your normal online stuff, right? Your orientation to online learning, syllabus quiz, discussion, icebreaker, which is basically just like say something about yourself so I can get to know you. And I do read through these. So I may not respond to every one of them, but I do like to read them because mainly so I know where you're at time zone wise. But also it's just fun to kind of get to know everybody. So look forward to that. Every week there's so the kind of the common format, and I'm actually going to skip right up here to week 2 so you can kind of see more normal kind of a week. So you can see here in week 2, we have preparation and reading, which is really just kind of our kind of stuff that every week you can basically all the material for the week, which is actually really handy. You'll actually, during our little weekly meetings, I actually kind of use that to guide a lot of our reading most weeks. So the week 1 preparation and reading, and just to kind of walk through this, what I would do, because there is a lot of material here. And just because there's a lot of material here doesn't mean you necessarily need to, diligently read all of it, because to me, a lot of this here is for reference. So what I'm going to kind of do is walk you through for the first couple of weeks of specifically what I would hit. And then you can kind of use the others as a reference, because the quizzes are open notes, open book. So, I would just kind of keep this handy for when you're doing the quiz, and then kind of use it to kind of study it ad hoc. So week 1, definitely every week cover the PowerPoint slides. These PowerPoint slides are really handy, little kind of summaries. So every week I would start right off with the PowerPoint before I even touch the book even, because, they kind of really go over things, which, I've covered a lot of these kind of terms very briefly here in our thing today. So, kind of check some of this out. Really nice, really just good overview. That's kind of where I would start. Let's see if I can hide that now. There we go. A lot of these are good. So I would actually cover the video tutorials specifically can be helpful, as well as what is MySQL if you need that. This week we're kind of going to bulk up. So most of the time you only kind of have one set of PowerPoints, but week 1, we kind of cover more ground because this one's a little bit more generic. So we're also going to cover chapter 2. So I would definitely check out those PowerPoints again, same kind of thing. And yeah, this is kind of where it goes through. It has you create a new user for your database, so on and so forth. These you can kind of just glean through. So if you want to kind of have them there, you don't necessarily need to know everything on there. I would kind of just use it if needed. So like if you want to learn more about MySQL Workbench, or you're kind of lost, feel free to do that. If you need help creating a new MySQL connection, jump there. Visual SQL editor, if you kind of want to check that out, it just kind of shows you how to do it. But I think most of you will catch on pretty quick, but it is there if you need it. So anyways, we'll cover those kind of every week for the first couple weeks, just so we make sure we're kind of hitting what we need to. The first week, it's all really good stuff. Later on in weeks, a lot more becomes kind of reference versus what you definitely need to know. So definitely do that. And on the topic of the textbook, there is this module here for textbook information. You can get the textbook digitally for free. And it's actually a pretty great textbook. I actually enjoy reading it. It's not too long. I feel like it's organized well. It's not like a boring read. So what I would do is I'd start with that PowerPoint and then kind of glean through the book, like, read it as much as you kind of need. I would definitely hit like all the main headings and kind of skim for the most part until like you hit something that, oh, I don't know this, and then I would definitely read the book. But anyways, back to week 1. So that's kind of preparation and reading. The discussions, the help each other in devotional. These are not graded in this course. And to be frank, I don't really like, besides the icebreaker, I like the discussion boards for the icebreaker. For everything else, I prefer Teams. So if you're not on Teams, highly recommend you get on Teams, because that's where I will do most of my communication. I send out announcements every week, but if you want the fastest way to kind of get a hold of me, Teams is the best. I'm on Teams pretty constantly, because I use Teams for my main day job. I have it on my phone. It's just super easy. And what I love about Teams is that, everyone in the course, like if someone's been stuck here before, they can always help out. Maybe they've seen a similar issue. Maybe they know how to fix something. So I like Teams because that's kind of where we help each other, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of where Teams will be. You don't need to worry about doing any of these in any week. Then what we're going to have is we're going to have exercises, and these exercises from week to week are quizzes, and oftentimes they're not multiple choice. They're more like practice queries for the most part, or kind of more like practice. And just these are quizzes, and to me, because these are exercises, I'm completely okay with you redoing your work. So if you get a bad grade and you want to fix it, just let me know and we can get you another attempt. You can try it again. More than happy to do that. In fact, I strongly encourage it, because that's what the exercises are for. It's for you to practice. And for these, as it says here in the instructions, it says you're encouraged to work in teams. So absolutely, if you guys want to get together as a group, you are absolutely willing to do that. And if you guys want to utilize any of the Canvas kind of group stuff, I can set those up. But Teams is also there. So if you guys just want to start a group chat in Teams, you can do video conferencing through Teams and all that kind of stuff. I would just recommend you kind of do that. But as far as teams go, there's no formal teams. If you want to work completely alone, feel free to do so as well. So just whatever it is you guys are comfortable with. If you want to find someone to work with, feel free. If you're having trouble finding someone to work with, let me know and I can kind of help match people up as well. But these are not too bad. In fact, let me just preview one. This one looks like it's mostly multiple choice. In future weeks, it's really going to be largely, type of response. So you'll notice this one's pretty easy. This is just asking, did you set everything up? So make sure that when you submit this, you say true to all those so you can get your points. Make sure you get everything set up. Really, week 1 is just all about just getting set up. We just want to make sure everything's set up so you're ready to go for the course. Then every week you're going to have a quiz, and the quiz is just on the chapters. So mostly it's basically out of the book, out of the PowerPoints. Really, that's kind of where it is. It's open book, open notes. You have plenty of time. So you can even use these quizzes to kind of guide your studies. I mean, I would definitely glean things. Like I would check out the PowerPoint, skim the chapter. Then I would kind of maybe start with the quiz and kind of, if you wanted to, use that to kind of guide your studies, if you wanted to. But they are open book, open notes, so not very much worry there. They're only 10 questions and you have 90 minutes. So you almost have 10 minutes for each question. Should be plenty of time. And then finally, every week we have a paper. And this paper is basically, now, just so you know, they kind of word it as if like you could role play a little bit. I don't care if you role play. Basically, you can just write a paper, and I don't care what like kind of format it's in, or anything like that. Really don't have too much of a preference on all that. It can just be kind of as however you want to do it, as long as it meets the kind of parameters here. So really, it just needs to be a 3 to 5 paragraph report. And let me actually check somewhere here. I think I have a version of this. Let me see if I have a sample here. Let me see if it's in, I know I have one here somewhere. I did a sample paper at one point. I actually wrote a paper so we could see what they look like here. Here we go. I do have it. All right. So just, as far as content, kind of what I'm expecting is full 3 to 5 paragraph reports. So you can see here, this one is a 4 paragraph one. But what I like to see, the reason why these papers are here is to kind of let you kind of guide your own studies, so to speak. And I really like it because I think you learn way more when you have to kind of put into words, your own words, what you've learned. So this is my week 1 paper that I myself wrote for the same prompt. And you can see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4-ish paragraphs long, maybe just 3. But I think it's important. Screenshots or code snippets are huge. Basically, if I start seeing like little 3-sentence long paragraphs that are basically easy to see that these are just barely trying to meet the requirements without putting much thought into it, I'm going to start docking points. But for the most part, like really what I would do is, as you're kind of reading the book, as you're gleaning the book, as you're gleaning the PowerPoint, I would, before I do any of that, I would go see what the prompt is for the paper. So that way, like as you're reading, you can quickly kind of jot down some thoughts, jot down some notes, and then try it. I think the biggest thing is, try it. So like the prompt for week 1 is basically, hey, how does the command line differ from Workbench or the GUI, and which one kind of do you prefer? Which one's better? It basically kind of wants you to weigh it both. And so, try things in both. So like you can see in this kind of example, I kind of like show a table and all the fields in there. And then here I am showing like all the tables here. So I would just try it in both, try things in both, take screenshots so you kind of have evidence to kind of back up your claims. Because, as we know, in professional environment, in education, everywhere, if you're making a claim, it's probably good to have some evidence to kind of back up your claim rather than just words on a paper. So I really like seeing like the screenshots. I get that it's not always doable. And you don't need to go overboard either, because I don't want you to spend, I know everyone's busy. I don't want you to spend a ton of time on the papers and such. So really just, I think we all know where that happy medium is, beefy enough that you can kind of get it done, but not too much. And that's why I think the screenshots are a big deal, because it just adds a lot of content, so on and so forth. Because like this looks like a lot, but really it's I think this took me maybe kind of like 15 minutes to kind of throw together. Any questions about the paper, or any of the other kind of weekly assignments?
one of the questions that I have is, first of all, nice to meet you. Second of all, one of the questions that I had is like, I think I set up my SQL, everything's fine. And I'm sorry, I'm a little late. But how, or like, is only through the quizzes and papers are we gonna show our work in MySQL, or like on the database side?
So yeah, so basically as far as showing your work, the exercises will probably be the biggest one, and your paper, just like you said. But the biggest thing that we'll probably do in the course, and glad you brought this up. So there's two options for a final, and we will cover this really in detail in week 3. But for the final, there's two options. You can either take an exam, which really isn't too bad, or you can take a final project. You can build a final project. Now, I have had many students that basically everyone who does the final project says they learned the most from doing the final project. If it were completely up to me, I wouldn't even have the exam as an option, because I think the final project, you learn so much more. And honestly, you have a ton of time to do it, because we started in week 3. It builds throughout the whole kind of term. It doesn't have to be too much. There's lots of help available. And so really the final project, like if you really kind of want to dig in to the databases and whatnot, the final project is going to be amazing. You're actually going to build your own database, and you're going to plan like what it's for and kind of demo that out. So it's really pretty fun. But there also is the final exam project. So, or the final exam option, if you just like don't want anything to do with the project, but highly recommend the project. And from week to week, especially during these meetings, basically the final project, I kind of really like the way the course is designed, because once we hit week 3, I start to actually let the final project kind of guide our discussions in these meetings and how we cover the content, because it's actually aligned quite well. So, week 3, we're going to start talking about the final project, and that's when we'll start talking about, the database design process, really in week 2. So anyways, lots of fun stuff with the final project. Highly recommend it, and we'll talk more week 3. Did that answer your question?
It does. I really appreciate it. Okay. I guess I can just ask my classmates on Teams later. But I'm just still struggling to see how, like, if I install things correctly, but I guess I can just ask it later on Teams.
Got it. Yep. And I'll actually be posting this video. You said you joined a little late. We actually walked through like how to connect and how to kind of do a couple tests.
Oh, thanks so much.
So yep. So we'll post that later, and you should, and it'll walk you right through it for the most part. So yep, should be good that way.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Yep, no problem.
Hey, I did miss like the first like couple minutes. So I don't know if you did cover this, but I was trying to create a user in MySQL, but I'm in the local, like on my computer's like local server, I guess, or whatever it's called. And I tried doing it, and every time I tried to do like the create user, like the student, it's an error.
Got it. Do you know what error is showing up?
It's the error code says 1396.
Does it have any text beyond the error code? Like, does it?
It just says operation create user failed for student. And then it says 3 dots after that.
Okay, yeah. I can take a look a little later. My guess, are you doing it in Workbench?
Yes.
Okay, so that's probably what it is. So one of the downsides to Workbench, and this is a great topic for your paper. One of the problems with Workbench is it's great for, there's a bunch of different types of kind of database related tasks. And in fact, they each have different kind of names, but I like to really separate them into 2 things. There's one that's kind of more database administration, and that's more like the security, like creating the users and giving users access to certain data and that kind of thing. MySQL Workbench is terrible for that. In fact, it wasn't built for it at all. And which is probably why you're getting the error. So for those kinds of things, the command line is actually just the way to go. Now, what MySQL Workbench is great for is viewing data, manipulating data. So actually dealing with the data inside or creating the structures of the data. So I kind of like to separate them. MySQL Workbench is terrible at data administration tasks, but MySQL Workbench is great for database development tasks. So that's kind of like, I'm glad you brought this up because it's important. So what I would do is if you go to MySQL Workbench, click on the little home tab up in the top left, and then you can right click on your connection and do the start command line client. And that should bring up a window. You may have to type in your password. And then once we're in, we can run these same commands. So once we're here, so for example, if I wanted to do this, I'm going to say create user student identified by student. I guess maybe I might already have one. Create user identified. Maybe I spelled something wrong. There we go. Okay. So create user student identified by student. So basically what this is saying, I'm creating a username is student, and I'm actually having student be my password. Now this isn't great practice, but we're kind of just doing this here. So what we're going to do now is, now we've created our user. Now we just need to give it access to our tables. So in this case, I'm going to say grant all privileges. Is privileges spelled with an E? I always mess this up. I think it's 2 I's. Privileges on, and what I'm going to do is if you wanted this user to be admin, you could do that. And so let's actually do this. If you wanted to kind of create your own user, right? So you can fully kind of do this with whatever user you want. So like, for example, if I wanted to create, like, let's say I wanted to create an account for my son, Finn, or let's just say my name is Finn. I'm going to create user Finn identified by Jamie, it looks like you raised your hand. Go ahead if you want. Identified by, and then like, I'm just going to give this one a password. So we're just going to say moo cows. I guess I need quotes. So created my new user. Now, once I have this new user, I need to give them access to something. So like if I wanted to give them access to the Sequila database, I could say grant all privileges, meaning everything. Now we could kind of narrow that down, grant all privileges on Sequila.star, and that's the database.table. In this case, we're going to say all tables to and basically we got to say Finn at everywhere. And we could put localhost there, but really I'm just going to put everywhere. So that way put this in %, means anywhere, meaning that they can connect from anywhere. And it looks like it's not going to let me because apparently my user's not root. So I don't have the grant privilege. So let me reconnect. If you're connected as root, you should be good. So let me connect as root here. Password here. we're going to cheat because I can't remember. So what we're going to do is we're going to go sudo. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to grant all privileges on Aquila.asterisk to fin at % for everywhere. And there we go. So now we can see that it's there. We're all set. We have this new user. So now at this point, I could come here, create a new one. We're going to say fin test. And instead of a root user, we're going to type in fin here, test connection, and type in our password of moo cows, and we're connected successfully. So if you run into any issues, feel free to let me know. Just reach out on Teams. More than happy to help. But hopefully this helps a little bit. So as long as you're connected with root, into it. There, provision. It says provision student user grant permissions. Is that a heading or a vague instruction? So I think that's just a heading. And in fact, in the preparation, in the readings here, it kind of walks through this. So it actually has all the code right here in the preparation and reading. So provision student user and grant privileges to the Aquila database. So kind of exactly what we just did. So we're going to grant all on star to root at localhost. And then we create our user and same thing what we just did. So should be good. And you know, it talks about provisioning the student user. If you don't want to do the student user, you can do your own, which I would recommend. So what I would recommend is create a user for yourself. That way you don't have to worry about root stuff, and just grant all privileges to yourself with the root user, and then you're good. When you do your grant, just make sure to do grant all on star to, like in this case, I'm going to say Tanner Crook at %. I don't know if this MySQL if we need the grant option. There we go. So you might want to say with grant option. That way, you know, because since mine wouldn't let me do that before for Fin, if you add this with grant option, it will allow you to kind of give other people permissions as well, which is kind of handy.
So what you were saying with you want to grant all the privileges to the user that you create because you don't recommend using root. So whenever you log into like the MySQL like terminal stuff, you do MySQL -u and then like Tanner Crook space -p, like you wouldn't do root anymore, and like that when you pull up the MySQL.
Correct. So then we would do it like this. SQL-u Crook -p, type in our password, and we're in.
Okay, so you would put your new user there instead of the root.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, precisely. And if you ever forget or don't want to deal with command line, you can just create your new connection here, just like we did. So like when we did the one for, you know, any of these. So like, for example, I created that Fin user. We can just come here, type in our username, type in our new password, some moo cows, test it. As long as it tests okay, we can add it. And now we have this one here. So now at this point, we could go here, do the start command line, use our new password, and bam, we're in here as that new user. Perfect. Great question. All right. I think that's about it. We've covered, did we get through everything in the module? We got all the way to the paper, which is the last thing for the week. We talked about teams. Does anyone else have any other questions? I know how it goes. As soon as we're done here, you're going to go start doing things. You're going to get questions. So if something comes up, feel free to reach out on Teams. If I don't get to it very fast, feel free just to shoot me a DM. So, so in Teams, there's a, let me see if I can just go there and we'll just go over it real quick. So in Teams, the way it kind of works is you can start a new conversation, and then basically underneath one of those, each one's a thread. So the only thing I would ask is try to keep things as threaded as possible. And I get, sometimes we goof up or whatever. But because it's easy just to kind of like hit the wrong box or think you hit reply, but it doesn't. So anyways, try to keep things threaded. Just start a new conversation. If you don't get answered, like, or if it's in a hurry, you can always tag me. So the way you can kind of tag me is just use an @ if you're not familiar with it. And then you can just search for someone. It's not going to let me tag myself, but you can just tag me in a comment or in the actual post, and I'll get to it as quickly as I can. And that way it'll ping me a little bit harder, if you will. So, and feel free to don't feel bad about it. Like if you're in your study session and you hit a roadblock or anything, just feel free to tag me in there, ping me, shoot me a direct messages over the chat functionality, badger me till I get it answered, kind of a thing. And the other advice I'll give you, because I don't want you to get frustrated, because I mean, I've been there where you spend hours and hours on something that should be trivial, but it's not for whatever reason. So if you ever get to that point where you're starting to like hit that frustration point where it's like, wow, I spent way too long on this, or I'm beginning to spend too much time on this, just shoot a message in Teams. Teams is there for us to utilize. And honestly, the more you post, the better the experience is for everybody. Because when they see that question, they're going to see it, and it should help a ton of other people, because then they'll see the question and the answers, which is great. I mean, we've kind of already seen this happen in this term already. So if you start hitting that point, feel free just to shoot it out there. Like, no, don't ever feel bad about it. Don't be shy. Just throw it in there. Couple other tips. If you're on computer, there is some really cool things you can do. So like if I wanted to kind of do a test, I could say, hey, I had a question about, or let's just, in case you want to create your own database user for yourself that is an admin user. I like to do this so I don't accidentally send it. Create a new user. So at this point, I can say create user, your name, I think technically there's like a new thing. I'm on an older version of MySQL, but technically there's a new thing that you have to do where you have to say you want to use a identified with MySQL native password by, that's what it is. Identified with MySQL native. There we go. So if you use backticks on either side, you can kind of make like a little code block, which is kind of fun. Create a new user, grant your new user privileges. So in this case, we're going to do a bigger code block because it's not liking us here. So to do a bigger code block, what we do is we can do backticks. 1, 2, 3. And then we do 3 backticks and we say grant all on star dot star to radio. You can kind of use that as like, you can kind of post some snippets in there and stuff, which kind of makes it a little easier to read. But anyways, that's a rat hole. But that is posted there. So if anyone wants to go check that out, it's on the Teams now. Any other questions before we disperse for the evening? All right, I will take that silence as a no. If anything comes up, feel free to let me know. Reach out on Teams, reach out really in any way possible. But otherwise, have a great week. Good luck. And yeah, welcome to CIT 225.
Thank you.